Okay, thank you so much for your attention in this presentation about enhancing EFL learners' writing skills through social network sites during COVID-19 pandemic. This project was developed by Lisette Limon and Esteban Sarte Mejia. Next, please. As you know, COVID-19 had a dramatic change in the way we teach English to different levels. And it was traditional offline learning. It changed for a virtual and online, and most of the teachers were quite astonished because they need to change their way they usually teaches their lessons. And at the same time, there was a significant growth of SNS, social network sites interactions, among not only students, but also teenagers and adolescents and adults. Focusing especially in this research, we are going to start dealing with university students. Next. Next, please. We were really concerned about how EFL learners from an advanced English course use those social network sites, hence for SNS, as a tool to enhance and practice their writing skills during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the sub-questions: what is the perspective of EFL learners about the use of those SNS for developing their writing skills? And what are the advantages and disadvantages EFL learners report about the use of these SNS? Next. As a general overview of the literature, we need to remember that online learning it's quite different from emergency remote teaching. Online learning has its principles, whereas emergency remote teaching was the name given for the kind of teaching adopted during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are another terms that deals with ERT, that's the emergency remote teaching. For instance, in this case, blended learning. Remember that blended learning deals with aspects of offline teaching and online teaching. ERT tries to adapt both perspectives from offline and online learning. So in this case, we need to integrate technology in the EFL classroom, since through COVID-19 emergency started, teachers were forced to adopt and adapt different electronic devices, electronic sites for giving their lessons. Focusing on writing, we need to remember that through writing we express different thoughts, but at the same time, it's the way we can process information we receive from different parts. There are different writing approaches. However, we are not going to discuss all the approaches, but we need to focus on the interactive perspective. This interactive perspective perceives the writer as an active creator of meaning, and the reader is the one who is going to decode all that information. Focusing on the writer. Writer needs to develop different skills, and one of those skills is to develop a well-organized, coherent, and well-structured text. But EFL learners, how can develop this strategy? Well, in this case, since we are focusing on the use of computer-mediated communication, we need to remember that there is an informal use of those communication media. in this case, social network sites, mainly are perceived as informal ways of communicating. However, when we need to develop students' writing skills, those SNS are seen as an excellent tool for enhancing students' writing development skills. Next, please. This research project was developed by using a questionnaire and semi-structured interview. Especially, this research adopted a qualitative aspect within a case study approach. All the results were analyzed by using some aspects of the grounded theory. The participants of this project were 10 students enrolled in an English language BA program at a Mexican university. Next, please.
Now let's move on to the data. So the data was categorized into 3 sections. The first one is ART challenges faced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And the first one is the sudden conversion from face-to-face classes to ERT. So here, participant D mentions that she has noticed that some of her teachers have some difficulties dealing with social network size and technology overall. And this can have a negative effect in her learning process. Well, having an instructional model that is made specifically for face-to-face instruction would most likely not work for an online one. And especially in this case, in which teachers and students did not have much time or basically any time to adapt to this new modality. Now, for the other challenge, it deals with the internet and technological problems. In this case, some students, they did not have the proper equipment, or they feel that they did not have the sufficient skills to interact or to engage in a ERT environment. For instance, participant D tells us that she had problems with the internet connection and all of the, all the problems that deal with technology that sometimes fails and sometimes, well, it's not really reliable. And that is basically a constant problem that we can find in this kind of modality. So most of these students were not really accustomed to use those online sources and online tools, or that they feel that they were not really prepared for engaging in this environment. And as a result, well, it may have had a negative effect in the in the whole development of this writing skill. Now, the second category is characteristics of social network size, usage, and grading. The first one is the fact that social network size is used for communication purposes. And well, during this pandemic, this was something really fundamental. We had really no other way of communicating with each other than using these social network sites, of using online tools. So for instance, participant A here shares with us that her teacher used the platform GoFormative to activities and used social network sites to share with them some other type of information, to like tell them what are they going to do in the next class, like who is missing some of the maybe assignments, or to share links for more material. So these online platforms became one of the main sources of communication between students and teachers, and among students and their classmates as well. And it helped them to sort of create online relationships and communities between each other, which is basically one of the main purposes for social network sites. Now, the next characteristic is that the fact that social network sites can be considered as an online space for short text in form of comments and creative text. Participant A and E tells us a little bit more how their writing is manifested in these sites. For instance, participant A says that she uses these Instagram stories as a diary in which she makes short comments like, here with my kitten, we're cold, and that is something that she enjoys doing it. And participant E says that he usually writes stories because that's what he does, and that he sends long messages to his friends and makes comments on posts or videos and all of that normal activities that are frequently seen in social network sites. So these online sites can encourage students to produce short text or to express themselves by using English in form of comments, in form of messages, in form of these Instagram stories or Facebook stories. And it kind of helps them to develop an ability to make this type of short text in a very organized manner. So these sites went from just being, online sites there to actual tools that help students to develop and practice while this COVID-19 pandemic was still going on. Okay, now the third category is SNS writing advantages and disadvantages. And the first one is the fact that by using social network sites, there's really no time or place restrictions. Like you can use them anywhere, anytime, as long as you have internet connection and a device to do so. So for instance, here we have that participant B gives us an example of the chat rooms in which you can just leave a message there and someone would eventually reply to you no matter when or where that person is. And that you get, by doing this, you get some sort of a real experience without having to spend money or traveling to another country. And the second advantage is the development of vocabulary and spelling skills. As we see here, participant C says that she feels that her brain kind of associates words with a concept or with a meaning in a specific sentence or context. And participant E tells us or gives us a little bit example of how he learned how to properly spell rhythm. That he knew that it had Y and H somewhere, but he didn't know exactly where. And by seeing it or by seeing that people use it this way, he just took it and started using it as well. So this kind of development, these skills is very important because it fits into the set of skills that hedge things that a learner needs in order to successfully achieve a writing task. So it's very important for them to develop these two skills. Another one is that social network sites can help learning topics that are sometimes overlooked in classes. Participant E says that by using these sites, he started to understand how English is structured and how people use certain expressions and in what context, and the difference between, one country and another. So being exposed to the different ways the language is used is very beneficial, or can be very beneficial, especially for those students who think or feel that these topics are not being paid enough attention in classes. And it can enrich their vocabulary. It can help them to use certain sentence structures or combine the right layout and correctly. And this again deals with the notion of the skills that a learner must have in order to face a writing task. Now, another advantage is that SNS provide an authentic and natural environment for learners to practice and communicate with others in a very less stressful and enjoyable way. So participant B says that she feels that she kind of gets the real experience of interacting with people, and these people is usually native speakers, that it kind of takes you out of the classroom and puts you in right into the real world. So having this authentic and natural environment can be very beneficial for learners, because they are offered with a lot of opportunities to put in practice what they learn in class, in like having a real experience of the real world. And finally, the last advantage is that social network sites help building motivation for students to keep practicing more the writing skill. Here we have participant A, who says that she was kind of tired of writing just essays and paragraphs, and by means of social network sites, she gets to express herself and her interests in her ideas without having to worry about being restricted by the teacher or by the syllables that they have to follow. So this helps them to build motivation and makes the writing task more enjoyable for them, and obviously it would make them more motivated to keep writing and to keep practicing. Okay, now finally we have the disadvantages. The first one is the fact that social network sites are made for entertainment and not for educational purposes. Participant C says that she finds it really hard to separate or to concentrate on the learning part, because perhaps the entertaining part or the fun part, it's more attractive. And well, these sites are made with that purpose, to keep the user's attention by giving them fun and entertaining activities. Although these activities sometimes distract the learners of their learning goals, and it's just well, it can be very, very disadvantageous for them. And finally, we have that the variation of English used in social network sites, it's mostly informal English. Here, participant A gives us an example by saying that, well, nowadays it's really popular to write things that might not be grammatically correct, or that might not be really well spelled, just because it's fun to do so and because everyone does it. And this kind of way of writing can be taken to the classroom, and that's where we find a problem, right? When they don't know how to separate how to write in social network sites and how to properly write in terms of academic situation. And now to conclude, we can say that the participants do use social network sites as a way of gaining extra practice for writing in a foreign language. And by doing so, they get to develop their vocabulary and spelling skills, as well as other skills like knowing more about the sentence structures that are used by real people, in native speakers situations, and the way that the language actually works, in the way the language is actually used by those people. Now, the limitations could be that the number of participants, since it was a very small scale study, it was just 10 participants, and the fact that it was focused only on the informal use of social network sites. But this obviously opens the opportunity, or gives us opportunity to more future research. For instance, it would be really interesting to see other language skills being searched in this social network sites context. And it will also be really interesting to see the contrast between formal and informal use of these sites in the same language learning context. And this would be all for us.
Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.